2020, an election year unlike any other. A pandemic impacting our lives. Protests fighting for people's lives. And the balance of power in Washington up for grabs.
Will you shut up, man?
Here at home in central New York, your vote matters. And your vote will elect a representative in New York's 24th district. Democrat Dana Bolter, Republican Congressman John Katko.
It's a rematch from 2 years ago. Where do they stand?
And have their positions changed? We'll find out right now.
Good evening and welcome to our debate. I'm Matt Mulcahy.
I'm Michael Benny. We're coming to you from Onondaga Community College. We are socially distanced, spaced out, but we will be totally relevant, I promise.
Plenty of room for everybody to stay healthy tonight while we dig into these issues. It's a true sign of the times how much coronavirus pandemic has really changed so much of our lives to the way we bring you the news each night and this debate this year.
We want to thank Onondaga Community College for opening up this space for us to host the debate and for the candidates who are participating right now, Congressman John Katko and challenger Dana Bolter. Thank you both for being here for this important conversation. Republican Congressman John Katko seeking a fourth term in Washington.
And his challenger, a familiar face also, Democrat Dana Bolter, looking to unseat the congressman after a narrow loss in this same race just 2 years ago. Here's how it's going to work tonight. For all of you who are watching at home and enjoying this debate, the candidates will have a chance for some opening comments.
And then we'll move on to a series of our questions. That'll take up the bulk of the hour we have together. Within that time frame, a chance to hear from actual voters outside of this building. And to end the debate, the candidates will make their closing arguments directly to you.
So we're going to begin with the opening statements tonight. And just a few minutes before we started this debate tonight, we did a coin flip to decide the order of various key events, including those opening remarks. And we're going to begin with Congressman John Katko with the opening statements first. Congressman Katko.
Thank you very much, Michael and Matt. And thank you, Dana, for being here again. 30 years ago, I entered into public service at a very high level at the federal government, and I'm still there. I started out my career as a federal organized crime prosecutor, being responsible at a very young age for some of the most dangerous and difficult cases in the country. And doing those cases, I was very successful. And I was successful because I learned how to build bridges and work with federal, state, and local law enforcement to take out the worst of the worst criminals that this country and indeed this world had to offer. I took those skills to Congress and have quickly become one of the most bipartisan members in all of Congress. I'm a bridge builder. I work with both sides. And being ranked number 2 most bipartisan member in all of Congress means that I am more likely than pretty much anybody else in Congress to work with the other side. And the other side's more likely to work with me than anybody else. I'm very proud of that. And we need that leadership going forward. We're in tough times right now. People are suffering. People are struggling. And what we're trying to do going forward is to work together. You'll hear a lot about the Problem Solvers Caucus that I'm involved in, 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans. We work together on a daily basis while in Congress, trying to find common ground to move this country forward. Again, I'm a bridge builder. I've had 65 bills pass the House and more than 24 signed into law by 2 different presidents, a Republican and President Obama. And I'm going to continue that going forward. And I look forward to the debate tonight. And while you're listening to us, just try and ask yourself, who is better to lead you out of this pandemic?
Thank you, Congressman John Katko. Now the Democrat challenger, Dana Bolter.
Thank you so much to CNY Central for hosting this, for the congressman to participating, and for all of you for watching. Good evening. Tonight, you're going to see that there is a very clear choice in this election. If you vote for me, you will be sending somebody to Congress who will start every day with one simple question. Will this make life better for Central and Western New Yorkers? You can count on me to fight for you because my story is your story. I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, what it's like to not be able to find insurance because of a pre-existing condition, to watch the medical debt pile up and have no idea how you're going to get out from under it. And I want to serve in Congress to make sure that no one has to face those challenges. Or you can give your vote to a man who has been in office for almost 6 years and done nothing to make healthcare more affordable and more accessible for us, who's voted to give $750 billion in corporate tax giveaways, adding $2 trillion to our debt and putting Medicare and Social Security on the chopping block, who's looked at 4 years of Donald Trump's failed leadership and said, yes, we need 4 more years of this guy. That's what you have if you vote for Congressman Katko. And if tonight's debate is anything like yesterday's, you're going to hear a lot of lies from the congressman. Lies about my character and my record. And the reason he's telling you those lies is because he knows if he's honest about where he stands and where I stand, he'll lose. Because he stands with Trump and I stand with you.
Thank you, Ms. Balter. We'll get to the questions now. And the first one will go to Dana Balter initially. The coronavirus pandemic is far from over in our country. We're seeing it every day. We're experiencing it. And for the first time since August, cases are reaching record highs in many states. Our country's case count is the highest in the world with more than 8.2 million. Those spikes being seen in our own backyard. We saw it in Cuyahoga County in our newscast just last night. The state's infection rate is now past 1.2% for the first time in weeks. So here's the question. As the next Congress takes office in the new year, what must be sacrificed to continue to provide support to issues related to COVID? Ms. Balter, you take the question first.
I think that dealing with the COVID crisis is going to be what takes up the majority of Congress's attention for quite some time now. It is unfortunate that we're in the circumstances we're in because Donald Trump has refused to get the spread of this virus under control. We have to start with a national testing and tracing program. We have to encourage everybody across the country to wear masks. These are the best tools we have at our disposal to control the spread. And we need to make sure that we have both vaccines and treatments that are safe and effective, and that those are distributed equitably. We are in a situation where everybody is so frustrated because still millions of people have not gotten back to work. Our kids are experiencing a second year of disrupted schooling, and we hear folks asking to fully reopen the economy, which of course everybody wants. But we have to be able to do those things safely. And getting control of the spread of the virus is the first step.
Thank you, Ms. Balter. Congressman Katko, what must be sacrificed by Congress in the budget process to continue to provide the support to issues related to COVID?
So first of all, I want to commend the sacrifices that my constituents and our community have made during this COVID crisis. We have done an outstanding job of getting this under control by following the guidance that County Executive Ryan McMahon gave us, as well as the mayors and the county executives throughout my district. So I commend all of you for wearing your masks and doing the things you're supposed to do to keep the virus under control here. There's a lot of things we need to sacrifice going forward. And everything my opponent said about the things we need to do, I pretty much agree with. The bottom line is we need to get the funding there. And there is sacrifices from a budget standpoint, but really the biggest sacrifice is that we're going to have to add to the debt to do it, unfortunately. The bottom line is the bill that I put out with my colleagues from the Problem Solvers Caucus, that I'm going to talk more about in a moment, really does lay out pretty much what my opponent wants. And the ironic thing is she came out and denigrated that bill almost immediately. But the bottom line is, I'm going to move forward. We're going to move forward together, and we're going to lick this thing, and everyone's going to be better off for it. That I assure you.
Thank you, Congressman. Let's get personal for a minute here, if both of you are willing, and talk to me about how the pandemic has impacted your life on a personal level. Congressman, you go first, please.
It was very personal. During the middle of the pandemic, when everything was going on and we were in lockdown, my father-in-law fell ill. And we took him home to our house. And he spent the last four weeks of his life at our house in the middle of a pandemic, trying to get people in and out of the house to care for him. And those last days was very difficult. But I'm so glad that we had that time with him. And I'm so proud of my wife and my kids for how they stood up to take care of him. It was terribly difficult. But what's even worse now is my mother-in-law is in an assisted living facility, and through no fault of theirs, we can't even give her a hug. She's mourning my father-in-law's death through a window, and that's very hard. We're very close with her. So I know people have stories like this all over the district, and my heart bleeds for all of you, and I'm with you because I understand what you're going through. And I can only tell you that we are going to get through this. Your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, your mom or dad, they'll get through it with the love you have from your families. And we're doing it now, and I know you can too.
The personal aspect, Ms. Balter, for you?
Yeah. First, I just want to say, Congressman, I'm very sorry for your loss and for Robin's loss and your children's loss.
Thank you.
It's a heartbreaking circumstance, and as the Congressman said, these are stories that we hear from people all across our district who are facing these challenges. What I have been most affected by and most worried about also is family health. My sister has cancer and essentially hasn't left her house in about 8 months because she cannot afford to expose herself to the risk of this virus. I'm deeply worried about her because at the same time that this is happening, we have a Supreme Court case coming up that is threatening to overturn the ACA, and that's what my sister depends on for health care. So we have compounding problems here that are potentially very devastating. And this is why my commitment is to ensuring that we get the resources that we need, and again, that we get the spread of this virus under control.
Let's go from the personal to the business aspect of things and make a turn to the financial hole that so many small businesses are trying, as we speak, to, I guess, dig themselves out of, really.
Now, Megan Coleman now introduces us to a local entrepreneur who's going through what so many Central New York business owners are facing right now. Megan.
The coronavirus pandemic has left many small businesses struggling to survive. Tonight, a look at one Syracuse business owner's message for those in Washington. When Jeff Canals and his partner founded Digital Hive back in 2014, it was just two young entrepreneurs with an idea. A digital marketing firm launched in a 200-square-foot office in downtown Syracuse.
We made no money for the first 12 months. And it was just completely bootstrapped from the ground up.
6 years later, Digital Hive has grown by more than 13,000%, with 54 employees at offices in Syracuse and Rochester, tapping into talent from across the country and recruiting local college students to stay here in Central New York.
Well, they may go off and have to try and find, tech jobs or marketing and advertising jobs in other big cities like Boston, New York. And instead, we're able to keep them right here in upstate New York, and we're just really proud of that.
Canals watched as the coronavirus pandemic devastated many small businesses. Thanks to PPP and Small Business Administration loans, he has managed to avoid layoffs. But he has a message for lawmakers.
For anyone that's in Washington or any politician, I think it's really critical for them to get to know small businesses and what our challenges are, what our opportunities are.
And Dana Balter, your question here. Do you have examples of small businesses who haven't been able to survive this pandemic? And is it the role of the federal government in Washington to help each and every small business stay afloat during these times?
The answer to both of those questions is yes. I have spent a lot of time talking with small business owners across the district of all different types and hearing stories. The story that Jeff tells is the dream of what we want to happen, where entrepreneurship brings jobs and creativity and economic growth for our communities. And right now in the pandemic, we are seeing such downward pressure on businesses. They are struggling just to stay afloat, and the federal government has to step in and provide support. The PPP program to support payroll was a good first step. It's not enough. Some of the businesses that I've been talking to locally are restaurants who have been hit extraordinarily hard by the pandemic. And I've worked with Congressman Earl Blumenauer in Oregon, who is the lead author on a bill called the Restaurants Act, designed to support restaurants and other businesses that sell food and drinks to the public. After talking to small businesses here, I asked the congressman to include language in the bill that would ensure that wineries, breweries, and cideries, which is a really important industry here in Central and Western New York, would be included in the bill, and he did. So now we know that they are going to get more aid. What we have so far is just the beginning. We've got a lot more work to do.
Congressman Katko, is it the role of the federal government to help each and every small business stay afloat?
During this pandemic, yes, and we've done that. And my concern is that my opponent wants to do the one thing that will absolutely destroy these businesses, these small businesses. She wants to raise their taxes by repealing the tax reform. That absolutely unleashed these businesses and made the digital hives of the world, and all the others compete more so than they ever have before in the world market, and to survive. And we delivered during the pandemic for them, and I'm very proud of that. I worked with the Small Business Administration, with every small business I could talk to during the course of this pandemic, and I worked with the banks to make sure they got the money to the front lines for the Paycheck Protection Program very quickly. According to the Small Business Administration, we saved as many as 200,000 jobs in Central New York. More than 8,000 businesses received more than close to $250 million in aid to them, and they are barely hanging on. And to think that What Vice President Biden wants to do, my opponent supports, is to raise the taxes on them starting out of the gate. My God, that would just crush the progress they made. And they're trying to hang on, and some of them are hanging on by fingernails.
What small businesses need right now to get through this pandemic is direct aid. That's why the Paycheck Protection Program was a good first step. The problem is it only addressed payroll costs, and small businesses face far more costs than that. They have debt that they have to service. They have all kinds of operating expenses. The Restaurants Act that I mentioned before provides grant money, not loans. They don't need to take on more debt in this crisis. It provides grant money to cover all kinds of operating expenses. That sort of direct relief, which the congressman has voted against multiple times, is what small businesses need to get through this crisis and back on their feet.
Thank you, Dana
If I
Balter.
may respond.
15 seconds.
Sure. I didn't vote against that. I was directly responsible for getting over $250 million of money to the businesses locally, and I wrote the bill, the Problem Solvers Caucus bill, that would get more there. And I'm going to continue to do that. The fact of the matter is, my opponent wants to tax these people at a very tough time in their existence, and that's not right.
Thank you. Michael.
Let's talk about the top of the ticket. Congressman Katko, you endorsed President Trump back in January, but you've openly disagreed with him at least 6 times, particularly on Twitter.
That's a colossal undercounting.
That's okay. It's an undercount. Okay, yes. So at least 6. You say more, and the topics range from the coronavirus relief package, racial tensions in this country. You did show support for the president on Twitter 2 times during that time span that we found. My question is President Trump for you a distraction, and have you ever considered in these months since January taking back that endorsement?
Of course he's a distraction. He has a colossal ability to put his foot in the mouth in times when we don't need him to. His rhetoric stinks. There's no question about that. But the bottom line is, I keep going back to the same thing. And to answer your question, yeah, at times I wonder, is it worth it? But because of his personality. I don't like his personality. But I'm looking at the bigger picture here. And it's something I've already touched on tonight. And that is, are we going to go as a country on the route we were with lower taxes and better trade deals and market-based health care as opposed to government-run health care, which we will definitely get if Biden gets in and my opponent supports Medicare for all, which is a gigantic tax increase. He's also said he's going to repeal the tax cuts, which led to the lowest unemployment in the history of our country for African Americans and Hispanics and women. And so that is why I'm sticking with him, not because of him, and actually pretty much in spite of him, because I'm very concerned about where we're going as a country. I will stand up to him like I stood up to him before, and I will be a check on him if he gets in, and if President Biden gets in, Vice President Biden gets in, I'll hope to God that he does a great job for this country, because we need to move forward, but we can't do it by taxing people to death. We just can't.
Very quickly, you said something that I think is news there. You considered rescinding the endorsement?
Oh yeah, you wake up every morning and say.
What was the? Do you remember the day? What was the tweet? What was the thing? What was it?
There's 2 things I do when I get up in the morning, and actually before I even get out of bed, my wife looks at me and just shakes her head, because I look and see, has there been a terrorist attack? Because I spend a lot of my time on anti-terrorism issues. And what did the president tweet so far today? And both of those things worry me. Of course, the terrorism attacks more. So a lot of times you're like, my God, what is he saying? Why is he doing this? But I have a role as a leader to speak up and go and speak out against him, and I have time and again, and I will continue to do that. And I can give you a chapter and verse if you'd like, but the bottom line is I am very concerned about how far left the Democratic Party is going, and my opponent is part of that far left trajectory, and that's the reason I'm sticking with them, warts and all.
Thank you, Matt.
Ms. Balter, that leads us to a political question for you. Where do you see yourself on the spectrum of the Democratic Party? Do you identify more with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or maybe with Speaker Nancy Pelosi? Where do you see yourself?
The person that I see myself working very closely with in Congress is Congresswoman Katie Porter, who is somebody that has worked very hard to hold power accountable. And that is what I believe we need from our elected representatives. Congressman Katko has tried repeatedly to paint me, as he just did, as far left and too far left for this district. It's one of the most persistent lies that he's been telling about me. The fact is that Central and Western New York looks like America. And the policies that I support are the things that most people want. I support universal health care, so do 63% of Americans. I support a $15 minimum wage, so do 68% of Americans. I support Roe v. Wade, maintaining legal access to abortion, so do 76% of Americans. I support universal background checks for gun purchases, so do 97% of Americans. These are not just majority positions, they're super majority positions. The congressman is the one who has extreme positions that are out of touch with the values of Central and Western New Yorkers.
Thank you, Ms. Balter.
May I respond for a moment?
Sure.
Sure. Thanks. Just consider this, folks, and you don't have to take my word for it. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which is the ultra-liberal left of the party, is investing in only a few races in the Democratic side this year, and are investing heavily in her race. And that is because they're quite certain that she's going to be part of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. It's plain and simple. Taxing and spending is what she's about, and she's telling you that. She wants nationalized health care, and she wants to tax you to death. I don't.
Thank you, Congressman. Michael.
So,
We'll move on to the next question. There's plenty of time to talk more about that. Michael.
I'm glad you brought up advertising, so let's talk about the commercials. Why can't you point out the differences or hold your opponent accountable for something without altering their image at best, or, let's face it, using the absolute worst picture of them? We know that voters have been bombarded with these from both campaigns, not to mention the outside money that's flowing in where the pictures are worse. But I can almost hear the people who find them in the campaigns say to themselves, we got to use this. Look at her eyes in this. Or let's shade this a little more gray. He looks smug in this picture. These images are from commercials that each of you has endorsed. And like I said, the outside money ones are even worse. My question is, when it comes to the imagery, why? Congressman Katko?
Sure. Listen, I started out this campaign positively and talked about my bipartisan record and all the things I've accomplished. I was met by a barrage of highly negative ads from my opponent right out of the gate. And then you have a choice. Do you either fight back or just let the narrative continue? I agree. These commercials are very difficult. But the commercials that I've had on are all about the issues. Number one is she's all for bail reform. Number two is she's all for Medicare for all, which is going to lead to big tax increases. Number three, she wants to get rid of tax reform, which is another big tax increase. Those are the types of things that I'm talking about during the course of my campaigns. And the imagery of her that's in those commercials were pictures that of her friends posted on the internet. We didn't doctor them. They weren't doctored. That's her. That's who she is, and we use those images.
Ms. Balter?
So there are some very big differences between the campaigns that we're running, including the images that we use. Again, go through and look at the commercials that we have run. There's not a single unflattering picture of the congressman in there as you describe them. Obviously, you don't have to look at very many of his commercials to see that he doesn't extend me the same courtesy. For him to say that his ads are somehow more positive or more focused on the issues is absurd. He has run 12 ads in his campaign. 10 of them have been attack ads. Every single ad that we put out is issue focused. It talks about either where I stand on the issue and or where the congressman stands on the issue. We do not put out anything that is personal, that is an attack that would be considered mudslinging, because I don't believe in that kind of campaigning. The congressman, on the other hand, has been running a Trump-style campaign, and I have heard from thousands of voters across the district who are very upset by it, young and old. And it's unfortunate, but not surprising that he's chosen to go down that path.
And that's your time. Thank you.
That wraps up the first portion of our debate tonight, but we have plenty more to come.
When we come back, we'll talk about the summer of protests all across the country and here in central New York. We'll hit some rapid-fire questions and some of the biggest issues that are impacting central New York right now and into the future. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to our CNY Central debate in the race for our state's 24th congressional district.
Let's get started right now with some rapid-fire questions. Are you both game for that?
Heck yes.
You've done this before, right? Matt, over to you.
Let's start this off. We'll take the first question to Ms. Balter. Who are you voting for president?
Joe Biden.
And Congressman Katko.
Donald Trump.
Michael.
Have you been tested for COVID, Congressman?
4 times. And I don't mind it because I broke my nose so many times playing hockey that every time they put something up my nose, it seems to make me breathe easier. So
Negative
okay
every time, of course, right?
Every time.
Ms. Balter, tested for COVID?
I have not. I have not had any symptoms, thankfully.
Well, let's stick with the health questions. Ms. Balter, did you get a flu shot yet?
No.
Congressman Katko.
Absolutely.
What's your greatest vice? What's something you do, eat, that you wish you did not? Ms. Balter?
Can't believe you're getting me to admit this on television. I'm a nail biter. I bite my nails.
I am too.
It's not a great habit.
Yeah, it's gross.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm a Reese's peanut butter cup biter.
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm a Reese's peanut butter cup biter. I love them.
I'm with you there, Congressman, all day long.
Especially with a cup of coffee. Awesome.
Let's talk about local political leaders. Ms. Balter first. I'll just throw out examples, but they don't have to be the only ones. Ryan McMahon, Ben Walsh. Who's doing a good job?
Well, both of the people that you named, I think, are doing a good job. I think Ryan McMahon has done a very good job leading Onondaga County through the pandemic. His regular press conferences, keeping the public apprised of what's happening and instituting strict guidelines and encouraging people to enforce them has been great. I think Ben Walsh is running a city that has been in a lot of trouble and has done a very good job trying to navigate us through an impossible situation.
Congressman?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they've both done a wonderful job. And, I look at the outlying areas, Oswego, they have increased tax revenue this year. It's stunning. So they've done a great job up in Oswego. Annalee McNabb-Coleman over in Cayuga County has done a great job under very difficult circumstances and a tight budget. And my hats off to her. And the folks up in Wayne County, Kenny Miller and all them, they've done a great job too. And like I said at the outset, these folks have been leaders and got people to follow their lead, shut their businesses down, and wear their masks. And because of that, we have a very low infection rate. And hats off to all the leaders on both sides of the aisle.
And our next question, Congressman, who was your most memorable teacher?
Mrs. Federico, even though she told me my singing sucked. I loved her.
Ms. Balter.
I had so many, but Mr. Chapman, who was my high school choir director, probably had the single biggest influence in my life.
Michael.
Congressman Katko, grade Governor Cuomo on his COVID response. A letter grade.
I would say B.
Ms. Balter.
A-.
The number of people that you're comfortable with right now gathering indoors with, what is it?
5 or 6.
About the same for me, of course.
And a final rapid-fire question. We'll start with Ms. Balter. Most interesting job you've held so far?
Most interesting job. I have to say bartender. The stories that you hear as a bartender, the conversations that you get to participate in are pretty extraordinary.
Congressman Katko, most interesting job?
Loading trucks for 4 summers at P&C Warehouse to put myself through college. That was very interesting and very hard.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Great insight into both of your lives up until this moment today. Really fascinating. And I guess, Congressman Katko, we won't invite you to the choir that Dana Balter's singing in.
They wouldn't even have me work the mics.
Yeah, well, we'll let her take the lead on that based on the teaching experience. Over the past 6 months, protests calling for change to systemic racism came together in cities really across the United States.
In Syracuse, we saw protesters hit the streets for 40 days straight, calling for concrete actions to address police brutality, racial discrimination, and segregation in central New York.
We had a lot of voices behind all those concerns, including Yusuf Abdul Qadir, who's the director of the Central New York chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union. Our Megan Coleman asked him for his question for the candidates for the 24th District.
For weeks this spring and summer, people took to the streets of Syracuse and outside City Hall calling for police reform. Months later, organizers continue to push for accountability and the acknowledgement that racism still exists.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Passion and protest fueled by the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis back in May.
Everyone had access to seeing the kind of gross travesty that was presented in that moment.
Yusuf Abdul Qadir, director of New York Civil Liberties Union, calls Floyd's death a flashpoint, sparking a national reckoning on police-community relations. And while we've seen some progress since those demonstrations, he says there is still more work to be done.
What we haven't seen is the transformation of the way that communities are policed. What we haven't seen is a more comprehensive understanding of what public safety means.
Abdul Qadir is still pushing for a national use of force policy, changing the size and scope of law enforcement, along with re-examining and removing qualified immunity for officers engaged in misconduct.
What are you going to do as a representative in the United States House of Representatives to ensure that communities like Syracuse are not going to continue to experience the results of decades of racially biased policing, police racial profiling, and excessive force that results in the death without accountability for law enforcement?
So, Ms. Balter, we begin with you. The question that Mr. Abdul Qadir just posed, what will you do in Congress on these issues?
I think we have to start by acknowledging that not only is systemic racism an issue, but it's an issue across all areas of policy and across all levels of government. This is part of the legacy of generations of racism that we have to confront and deal with today. With regard to policing and community safety in particular, we need reforms at the national level. We cannot leave these decisions just to local communities, because then we see huge differences in equity and equality across communities. So I support reforms at the federal level, like a national use of force policy that bans chokeholds, a national registry of police misconduct to make sure that if an officer loses their job because of abuse or misconduct, they can't just get another job somewhere else as an officer. We need to demilitarize our police departments and stop giving them excess military equipment. No local department needs a tank. We need to ensure that our local citizens advisory boards have real teeth so they can exercise meaningful accountability and oversight. And we need to recognize that public safety encompasses law enforcement and other things, like dealing with crises our communities face in homelessness and mental health and domestic violence and substance abuse. And we've got to fund programs to address those challenges too.
Thank you, Ms. Balter. Congressman Katko, same question.
And she's going to be really happy with me, because that's exactly what I've been doing on a national level. Before I explain, let me commend the folks in the Black Lives Matter movement locally for not having their protests turn violent. You did a great job of airing your concerns, but in doing it in a respectful and important way. And hats off to all of you. But what I've done since this crisis started is to help a movement start on the federal level, which I'm very proud of. I was one of the very few people that was selected to help write a police reform bill, along with a couple of my friends in the Problem Solvers Caucus on both sides of the aisle, and the Congressional Black Caucus, Karen Bass and Hakeem Jeffries, to name a few. Karen Bass, as you may recall, was on the short list for Vice President Biden's vice president pick for this ticket. And we've been working together for months trying to put together a bill which I think is in its final stages now, and I just checked on it again yesterday, and I think we're going to get across the finish line. It's going to have all the things that she talked about, which I know are important to her and important to all of us. It's going to acknowledge that racism exists. It's going to acknowledge that we need to do a better job at police departments. It's going to ban the use of chokeholds. It's going to have police retraining. It's going to have prioritization for diversity within police departments. It's going to have a lot of great things about forcing police departments to be held accountable and individual police officers to be accountable. But make no mistake about it, the average cop is great, but the ones that are bad, we got to weed out and make sure they can't go to another police department. And this bill is going to contain all that, and I think you're really going to like it when you see it.
Thank you, Congressman.
Sure.
Michael.
Let's stay on this topic.
May I?
15 seconds.
I think it's worth mentioning that the congressman has been in Congress for 6 years, has never talked about these issues or led on these issues until this summer's demonstrations made it unavoidable. I was at the demonstrations across our district, standing with people to say that Black Lives Matter and that we are long overdue in addressing this challenge.
I got to respond to it just briefly because it's just not true, and it's just not true. Take a look at the First Step Act, folks. Look it up online. The First Step Act was the first major prison reform that tried to address some of the racial inequities in sentencing that existed due to Vice President Biden's 1994 crime bill, which established mandatory minimums for lower-level drug crimes. We fixed that. So for you to say that I haven't been involved in that, that's just not true.
We're going to stay on this topic. We're going to stay on this topic here because it seems we have your attention. Not that we didn't before. Have you personally witnessed an act of racism, Congressman Katko?
Oh, throughout my 20 years as a prosecutor with certain police officers, absolutely. In fact, I prosecuted corrupt police officers and officers that were involved in activity they shouldn't have been. Absolutely. So that informs me as to why, and that's why I wanted to get involved with this police reform bill. Lord knows I got enough on my plate, but I felt compelled to do it because of what I saw firsthand. And I'll reiterate, the vast majority of police officers in this country do a phenomenal job and risk their lives day in and day out. And please, don't forget that. But we have to acknowledge that some of them are racially insensitive or just plain out, flat out racist who do racial profiling. Tim Scott, who's a senator, African-American Republican senator, sometimes gets stopped going into the Capitol because they don't believe he's a senator. So there's obviously racism that goes on still. And you can either complain about it and point fingers like my opponent seems like she's trying to do, or you can roll up your sleeves like I've done and try and do something positive about it. And like I said, you're going to love this bill when it comes out, and I can't wait to talk about it with everybody when it comes out. It's going to be great.
Ms. Balter, the question is, have you personally witnessed an act of racism?
Just about every day. We see racism all around us if we're paying attention. It's in big ways when we talk about police brutality, and it's in small ways when we talk about the person who is in line waiting for coffee at the local coffee shop and gets passed over after standing there for 10, 15, 20 minutes waiting to be served. It is very important that we are committed to rooting out racism in all its forms and in all areas. And to do that, we have to be willing as individuals to stand up and speak up and take action.
Next question. A new report by Central New York Fair Housing shows poverty in Syracuse is getting worse. 5 years ago, Syracuse was named #1 in the nation for concentrated poverty for both Black and Hispanic families. At the time, the city had 15 neighborhoods officially designated as concentrated poverty for those ethnic groups. The most recent count, though, is up to 19. Congressman Katko, can you name 3 steps that you've taken in your first 3 terms to get this to the systemic roots of concentrated poverty in our community?
Sure. First of all, the tax reform, I think, has helped in those areas, and I'll explain why. Coin Industrial Laundry is being redone right now because of the opportunity zones that are in the tax reform bill. That tax reform bill allows businesses to invest in huge tax credits when they invest in highly impoverished areas like that area, and it's working. My opponent wants to get rid of the tax reform. Number 2 is I've worked repeatedly with folks like Ben Carson on the lead paint issue and the public housing issue. I had Ben Carson come up here, and some people criticize me for doing that, but I brought him up here for a reason. When he left, very shortly thereafter, we had the largest amount of lead paint funding we've ever had in the history of our city and our county. If you recall, the lead paint program was a mess up until the time that Ben Walsh took over. So I worked with Ben and I worked with Ryan to get that done. And I've also got him very interested in helping rebuild the 15th Ward, him being Ben Carson, using HUD dollars and stuff and investment from the Allen Foundation and other communities, and also working with the STEAM School project to help make sure that's a real success.
The 15th Ward project and the STEAM School have not taken place, so what's holding it up?
Well, what's holding the STEAM School is well on its way to getting there now, and that's because of all the dialogue we've had. And the 15th Ward, I think, is going to come when we do the rebuilding of 81. I'm pretty certain that's where we're going to try and do it. But I've had a lot of meetings with folks at the Allen Foundation and with HUD and others on this issue, and with Ryan and Ben. And it's a project that we're all behind, and we're all going to try and make happen.
Ms. Balter, name 3 steps that you would take if you were elected to get to the systemic roots of this concentrated poverty in Syracuse.
So the concentrated poverty you're talking about is a really challenging generational problem. And if we are going to be successful in tackling it, we have to attack it on lots of different levels at the same time. So I think about 3 primary areas: education, housing, and jobs. Education, we know, is one of the best tools we can give our kids as a foundation for success in life. So we have got to, at the federal level, expand Title I funding for schools, fully fund IDEA for children with disabilities, and make sure that we have universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. That's how we are going to help the next generation set up to break the cycle of poverty. We need to invest in good jobs. This is where I think infrastructure investments and renewable energy investments come in, and we have to make sure that the folks who have been historically excluded from jobs, the people that you are talking about in the city of Syracuse, have first access to them. And then we need to be serious about real affordable housing options, because there is no city in the country where a minimum wage worker can afford a 2-bedroom apartment for their families. I think if we are successful in attacking those 3 things, we will go a long way to breaking the cycle of poverty.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Michael.
Let's talk about something that is straining budgets in families and is quite frankly scary to people who live here. This can be an all-consuming worry about paying for medications. We know that. We know that when a child in the family, it can be particularly troubling, especially if a child has diabetes. We know that Megan Coleman spoke with a family in Baldwinsville who wants to make sure that their son is protected from ever having to pay for his life-saving medication without help from insurance. Here's Megan.
People across central New York continue struggling to pay for prescription drugs. Tonight, we introduce you to a Baldwinsville family who worries about the future of the Affordable Care Act. Like most parents, Megan Wrench of Baldwinsville always worries about her son. But it was his life-changing diagnosis a week after his 5th birthday that changed everything.
There's just so many things that change your life with diabetes.
Sean, now 8, relies on an insulin pump and glucose monitor to manage his type 1 diabetes.
We're lucky to have insurance and to have fairly good insurance, but I know a lot of families are not that lucky.
Without insurance, Wrench says her son's glucose monitor would cost more than $900 a month. Add insulin, the insulin pump, and everything else he uses to manage his condition, and the cost would be unaffordable for many families.
I'm very concerned about decisions on health care, especially pre-existing conditions. It's very important to me that pre-existing conditions are covered and continue to be covered, as that will be something that will obviously never go away for my son.
So here's the question, and we'll start with Congressman John Katko. What elements of the Affordable Care Act are critical to maintain as they are right now, regardless of what happens with that act in the Supreme Court? And as a follow-up, because we're talking about insulin, I remember the president saying during the debate that insulin is like water with him in the White House. So how do you reconcile that?
No, you have another example of him putting his foot in his mouth, because it's not like water. It's not for families like them. The juvenile diabetes folks come to Washington every year, and I meet with them, and I meet with kids like Sean all the time. And it informs me. First of all, I have never and will not vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act. I buck my party in that, because unless and until there's an adequate replacement. One of the things we're trying to do is get prescription drug prices under control, and to make sure that you fight to keep the pre-existing conditions coverage unless and until there's an adequate replacement of the Affordable Care Act. And on my record, sterling on that. But what I did vote for, and what I do support, is putting a cap on insulin because of these kids and because of what their families go through. It's H.R. 19, and what it did is put a cap on prescription drug prices for diabetes. It would force the pharmaceutical companies to go more towards generic versions of their drugs much more quicker than they care to. It closes a donut hole for Medicare for all and caps the cost of prescription drug prices for people on Medicare. And it's just the start. And we understand there's much more that we need to do. We understand that we can only do it if we work together in a bipartisan manner to sit down. And I'm hopeful after the fireworks of the election that we can sit down and get a real meaningful reform, because I think everyone has an appetite to do that.
Thank you, Congressman. Ms. Balter, what's in the Affordable Care Act as it stands that must be retained no matter what happens with the Supreme Court?
everything that's in the Affordable Care Act has to be retained because it's expanded health care to millions of Americans who didn't have it before. And Congressman Katko describing Donald Trump's comment about insulin as another example of him putting his foot in his mouth is another example of the congressman minimizing the real harm that Donald Trump does. It's not about ill-advised word choices. It's about his flagrant disregard for the health and well-being of Americans. Donald Trump and his administration, with John Katko's help, are in court right now trying to kill the Affordable Care Act. John Katko's vote on the tax bill set up that court case, and as a result, 300,000 people in this district, like me, like Sean, who have pre-existing conditions, could find our health care gone in a matter of months. This is about saving lives. We need to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. Congressman Katko voted against the bipartisan bill in the House this year to do just that. A phenomenal piece of legislation that would have overnight made a huge difference in the cost of health care for Sean, for his family, for everybody across this district.
So there's nothing wrong with the Affordable Care Act, in your opinion?
We need to strengthen it. We need to encourage more states to adopt the Medicaid expansion because we've seen that in states where they've done that, they have much better outcomes and more people are covered. What we need to do right now is stop the assault on it. We need to save the ACA so that people still have health coverage.
If I may respond, because that's what you said is just not true. And I asked for a moment to respond. First of all, I am the only person in this debate that has stood up and wants to keep the Affordable Care Act until an adequate replacement is ready. My opponent wants to replace it with Medicare for All, which is a government-run system that is going to tax you to death in order to pay for it. And I've never voted for it to get rid of pre-existing conditions. I've stood up to my president and I've stood up to my party to preserve the Affordable Care Act. And for her to infer otherwise, it's just not accurate.
Thank you both.
Sorry, I can't let that stand because that is not true. The congressman is now trying to position himself as somebody who's protecting the ACA. He has been talking for 6 years since his first run about getting rid of that bill and replacing it with a phantom plan that we have never seen.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll save the rest of it for the commercials. Thank you.
Congressman Katko, in a debate yesterday that was on Syracuse.com, you actually made an accusation that I want to follow up on. Mm-hmm. It's regarding Ms. Balter's campaign finance statements and the fact that she took a salary and then, which ultimately was paid back. I was reading through the federal prosecutor guidelines for how you prosecute campaign violations such as that, and it said there has to be a knowing and willful violation. Do you today want to stand by your accusation that she committed a crime in taking that salary?
I'm not making an accusation, and I want to make clear what I said.
Sure.
And let's make sure that people understand the facts here. The facts are that last year, during the campaign, she took money from her campaign that she wasn't supposed to, thousands upon thousands of dollars. And when she got caught, she paid it back, right? Under Title 52, United States Code Section 30109, subsection D, you can look it up yourself, if you take more than $2,000 from your campaign illegally, that could constitute a crime. I said could. I didn't say she absolutely committed. I didn't say she's going to prison. I said it constituted criminal conduct at least from a technical standpoint.
Do you have any knowledge of anybody ever being prosecuted criminally for that type of violation?
I sit on the Ethics Committee in Congress, and that's why I understand this stuff inside and out. And she has a plethora of FEC filing misstatements, and she also has the fact that very few people have ever done taken money from their campaign illegally. Now, she paid it back, and I commend her for doing that, and this may all be nothing, but technically it does constitute criminal conduct, and it could be prosecuted for that. Whether or not it does, whether or not the prosecutor ultimately finds that she had the criminal intent remains to be seen, and that's all I was trying to say. Is it could possibly happen, it could not possibly happen.
And Ms. Balter, did you have knowing and willful knowledge that you were doing something that was illegal?
Of course not. I made an honest mistake, which I've explained many times. The congressman did accuse me of committing a crime. He's trying to walk that back now. He did accuse me of committing a crime, and he was immediately fact-checked by 4 local press outlets that verified that, in fact, I did not commit a crime. To suggest otherwise is slanderous at best. And what the congressman is saying about taking a salary, this is something voters need to understand, because it is about who has access to the levers of power in government. There's a reason that candidates are permitted to draw salary from campaigns, and in fact, it was a bipartisan Federal Election Commission that instituted this rule. Congress for a really long time has been dominated by millionaires, people who don't share our day-to-day experiences and therefore don't understand the policies we need to make our lives better. The reason candidates are allowed to draw salary is so that everyday folks who can't afford to take a year off from work can run for office.
Is it reasonable, though, that a voter might see that the mistake that you made was done because you were not properly informed about the law, and therefore, why weren't you properly informed as a candidate? That is your responsibility.
I wasn't properly informed. I did not know about the time restriction on drawing a salary. And once it was raised, I paid the money back. We replaced the compliance firm that's in charge of paperwork and all of that. And I did everything that I needed to do to address an honest mistake with integrity, which is, I think, what we should be asking for from our elected officials and people who serve us. Not that they never make mistakes. An honest mistake is an honest mistake, but that when you make one, you address it immediately, you do it with integrity, and that's what I've done.
Is Congressman Katko worthy of office?
That's for the voters to decide.
Is Dana Balter worthy of office?
Absolutely, just not this time.
Thank you. At that point, it's a nice wrapping up point. We want to get to your closing remarks for the night. We appreciate everything you've done here so far, answering the questions honestly, completely. Our apologies for having to cut you off for time on occasion, but very respectful, and we appreciate that. We begin the closing remarks with Dana Balter, the Democrat.
Thank you again so much for doing this. The stakes of this election couldn't be higher. We are facing the biggest health crisis in 100 years, the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression, a climate crisis that literally has our country on fire, and a racial justice crisis that we are generations past due in addressing. And at the top, we have a president who makes it all worse. He has refused to get the spread of this virus under control. He foments hatred and fear. He is making us less safe with every passing day. Donald Trump is the most dangerous and corrupt president of our lifetimes, and John Katko endorses him. And now he is running a Trump-style campaign full of lies and fear. We get enough of that from the president. We don't need it from our congressmen, too. What we need is leaders who are going to work to bring us together instead of tearing us apart. People who will work to lift us up because they understand the challenges that we face. And I do. As I said, my story is your story. I know how badly you need a champion to fight for you to make your life just a little bit easier so that you can afford to send your kid to the doctor and fill your parents' prescriptions, so that your paycheck is big enough to cover the rent on the 1st and the national grid bill on the 30th. In Congress, I will always put Central and Western New Yorkers' needs first. I hope to have your support and your vote, because together we can bring America back.
Thank you, Ms. Balter. Congressman Katko.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate the discussion from all of you. One of the things that I think I agree with my opponent on is that this is a very consequential election. My opponent does want to raise taxes, and she does want to repeal the tax reform, and she does want Medicare for all, and she has said in her own words on videotape and audio tape that you have to raise your taxes to do so. So this is a very consequential election. And we're at a very difficult time. And what have I done during this difficult time? I've delivered hundreds of millions of dollars in COVID relief funds to this district. I've also helped write the Problem Solvers Caucus model, which is going to be the model going forward for the next relief package, which is coming soon. I also leaned on a racial issue and helped work with Congressional Black Caucus to write the police reform bill, which is also going to be coming soon. And the bottom line is, I am one of the most bipartisan members in all of Congress, more than any other Democrat, all but one Republican. So really the question is, do you want someone who's going to lead you out of this pandemic, who's been there, who's done that, and who has a proven track record? Or do you want someone who says they're going to do this and do that, but you know she's going to raise your taxes, and she's going to do Medicare for all? Those are the type of things that are going to cripple our economy. And like the Hive, question from the owners of the Hive, if you ask them if they want to pay more taxes, I can guarantee you they don't want to, just like you don't want to at home. So this is a consequential election. And by the way, Donald Trump isn't running for Congress here. I am. So judge me on what I've done. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Katko and the challenger Dana Balter. Our rematch debate has concluded. We learned a lot about both of you tonight, those personal stories. Thanks for sharing those, of how you've cared for your family members and your sister with cancer and the challenges that we all face of getting through this difficult time in the pandemic. It's been very interesting to hear that and also listening to the questions from our voters in this community.
And isn't that personal insight so much more valuable to the people who will be casting votes in this election than some of the campaign commercials that are on television? Can we get agreement on that? I think we absolutely can. Remember, everyone, it is your voice, your future. Please vote in this upcoming election. We hope that we've shined a light on this marquee race in central New York.
And the write-in voting is already underway. The early voting starts Saturday, and Election Day, of course, just 2 weeks away now. So we are well underway in the voting process in this critical election for our community, the 24th Congressional District, and the country. For Michael Benny, I'm Matt Mulcahy. Have a great night. Thanks for joining us tonight.